Why British pubs were once sacred spaces. British pubs have always been more than just places to drink. They were once sacred spaces where communities gathered, laughed, and lived out their stories. They served as the beating hearts of villages, towns, and cities, offering ritual, comfort, and connection. For centuries, pubs shaped the rhythm of daily life in Britain. From roaring firesides to barroom banter, they stood as cultural landmarks where class blurred, stories thrived, and friendships grew. This is why British pubs were once considered sacred spaces across the UK. The third place that held communities together. Every society needs what sociologists call a third place, somewhere that isn't home or work, but where life between the two unfolds. In Britain, that place was the pub. Whether in sprawling cities or tiny rural villages, the local pub provided a neutral ground where everyone could gather. Unlike a formal club or society, you didn't need a membership card to walk in. The door was open to all, and the atmosphere was welcoming. For working-class men in the 19th and 20th centuries, pubs were the natural destination after a long day's labor. They weren't just places to drink, they were places to decompress, laugh, and restore spirits before heading home. As Britain's culture shifted after World War II, women began frequenting pubs more regularly too. By the late 20th century, pubs had evolved into more inclusive spaces where the entire community could feel at home. This accessibility made them vital social lifelines. Coffee shops and gyms might serve as third places today, but in the golden age of UK pub culture, no space could rival the pub as Britain's great social equalizer. A living room beyond four walls. For many, the pub felt like an extension of home, a living room with character. The landlord and landlady were almost like hosts of a second household, greeting regulars by name, and often knowing their stories as well as their favorite drinks. Wooden beams, dim lighting, and the warmth of an open fire gave traditional pubs a homely feel. Families often made the pub part of their lives. Children in the mid-20th century weren't uncommon in pubs, sipping lemonade or orange squash while their parents caught up with friends. Sunday lunches often meant a hearty roast at the local pub, with beef, potatoes, and Yorkshire pudding served in generous portions. Celebrations naturally gravitated to pubs. Weddings, anniversaries, and even funerals often ended there, blending joy and grief with the comfort of shared company. The communal setting transformed the pub into more than just a business. It became a trusted place to share life's highs and lows. That blend of familiarity and ritual explains why so many people still see traditional pubs as extensions of their own living rooms. A home beyond home. Storytelling by the fire. The British love of storytelling found its natural home in the pub. Long before television or the internet, pubs served as theaters of spoken word. Locals swapped tales of fishing expeditions, mining dangers, factory shifts, and seafaring adventures. In rural pubs, the fireplace was the stage. Old-timers passed down local legends while youngsters listened, learning not only history but the humor and cadence of their community. In bustling city pubs, banter across the bar often turned into comedic performances in their own right. Music, too, carried storytelling traditions. Folk songs filled pubs in villages, while urban pubs became the breeding ground for bands that went on to define generations. Groups like the Beatles in Liverpool and Oasis in Manchester cut their teeth in pubs and small clubs before achieving global fame. This oral tradition turned pubs into vessels of memory. They were places where voices echoed long after their speakers had left, adding to the sacredness of the space. Rituals that made pubs sacred. One reason British pubs felt sacred was their reliance on ritual. Everything from buying rounds to calling last orders gave the pub a rhythm of its own. These weren't laws but unspoken traditions that bound people together. The etiquette of the bar was itself a ritual. Cutting the queue or failing to buy your round was frowned upon, not by management, but by the community itself. In this way, pub culture was policed not by rules, but by shared respect. Games were another ritual that united people. Darts, dominoes, cribbage, and later the beloved pub quiz gave shape to evenings and offered everyone, from seasoned locals to newcomers, a way to belong. These repeated acts transformed ordinary drinking into something ceremonial. They gave pub culture a sacred sense of continuity, something people could rely on no matter how much the outside world changed. Where class lines blurred. In a country often defined by social class, the pub was one of the rare places where divisions softened. Dockers, clerks, teachers, and landowners might all share a bar. While Britain's class system didn't disappear inside the pub, it blurred just enough for conversations and friendships to flourish across boundaries. For rural communities, farmers and laborers mingled freely. In urban centers, industrial workers might drink alongside white-collar staff. Deals were made, disputes resolved, and community politics played out over pints. This sense of equality, imperfect though it was, gave the pub a democratic quality. It wasn't Parliament or the courts where many local issues were solved. It was the back room of the pub. The leveling effect of pubs explains part of their sacredness. They weren't just drinking establishments, but spaces where British society found rare moments of balance and common ground. Anchors of identity and tradition. Pubs weren't simply buildings, they were landmarks of identity. Their names told stories: the Red Lion, the Crown, the King's Arms. These names often harkened back to heraldry, trades, or royal connections, weaving local history into daily life. A pub's sign swinging in the wind was as iconic as a church steeple or post office. Some pubs, like Ye Olde Trip to Jerusalem in Nottingham, dating to 1189, or the Old Ferry Boat Inn in Cambridgeshire, 11th century, predate parliaments and national institutions. Pubs embodied tradition. They were the glue binding past to present, offering continuity in rapidly changing times. To lose a pub wasn't just to lose a business, it was to lose a part of local identity. This role as cultural anchor elevated pubs beyond commerce. They became symbols of stability, sacred in the way they preserved history and heritage. Shelter in times of hardship. Pubs also earned their sacred status by offering refuge in hard times. During World War II, many pubs became shelters during the Blitz, with cellars doubling as protection from bombs. Landlords kept spirits high, offering comfort in times of fear. In the economic struggles of the 20th century, miners' strikes, unemployment, and recessions, pubs were lifelines. They weren't just places to drink cheaply. They were spaces where solidarity was built and hope rekindled. Even outside national crises, pubs provided refuge in daily struggles. A neighbor offering a pint during a difficult time, or a community rallying around someone in need, turned pubs into sanctuaries of human connection. This resilience explains why many Britons look to their local pub not just as entertainment, but as a symbol of endurance in the face of hardship. Cultural birthplaces and creative sparks. British pubs were not only social spaces, they were cultural incubators. Folk traditions thrived in rural pubs, while urban pubs fueled music revolutions. Many artists, writers, and musicians found inspiration at sticky tables and smoky corners. Dylan Thomas, the Welsh poet, famously wrote and performed in pubs. Countless folk musicians passed traditions orally in pub sessions. Punk, Britpop, and indie scenes all owe their early roots to pub backrooms. These spaces acted like informal universities of culture. Ideas, songs, and poems flowed freely, unencumbered by formality. The pub's openness to creativity helped shape Britain's global cultural identity. This artistic energy added to the sacred aura of pubs. They weren't just where communities gathered, they were where cultures were born. British pubs were once sacred spaces because they embodied more than drinking culture. They served as Britain's living rooms, sanctuaries in hardship, stages for creativity, and anchors of community identity. Rooted in ritual and tradition, pubs blurred class lines and created belonging. Though times have changed, their legacy remains. Every pint poured today echoes centuries of laughter, storytelling, and solidarity. Thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell.